This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Clay Ferraro, Ira Winderman along for the ride with you guys as the Miami Heat are moving on to the second round of the playoffs. And, you know, Ira, Game 5 almost feels like more than 36 hours ago at this point. But I do think it's worth going back. And we're going to spin this thing forward. We're going to talk a lot about the potential upcoming matchup. I think we still probably both feel like it's going to be Philly, although sure. I am absolutely not dismissing the possibility they could blow this thing entirely. But I want to look back.
Doc Rivers blow a playoff series? Never heard that one.
You know, and that was the thing, too, Ira. Like, I heard him talking yesterday.
That was scary,
like,
yeah.
It's like that made me think more that they've got a chance of blowing this thing because he's in his own head.
He's preparing for it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think we have to talk about Victor Oladipo. And, you know, we started the crosstalk by discussing the whole Jimmy Butler thing and the fact that he didn't play. But the victory in Game 5, thanks to Victor Oladipo coming on and starting for Butler and doing what he did, in particular in that first quarter, Ira, it was like a storybook type of thing. And I'm trying not to get like too overly sentimental about this, but this was not coming out in his first game against Houston. This was not coming out even in Game 4, where I thought it was great that even though he couldn't throw the ball in the ocean, he was doing all of the things that the Heat like you to do to impact winning. This was him coming off the bench and starting for an all-NBA caliber player and going out and replicating largely what Jimmy Butler would have done for the first 3 quarters or so. You can tell he kind of ran out of gas a little bit in the fourth quarter, although he still had enough at the end to put the defensive pressure on. I feel like he did more in Game 5 than I thought he had at any point since he's been in a Heat uniform to solidify himself and give himself a chance to get back into the national spotlight, not really just this year, but moving forward, and also probably made himself a lot of money in the process.
Yeah, I mean, that one moment, and again, I'm living in the moment a little bit more because we're in the playoffs, and it's a pretty damn good moment for the Heat, and where I kept fending off the, no, he's not a rotation player, no, it doesn't work here, no, they need the spacing. My ask Ira at sunsentinel.com today was whether he should replace Duncan Robinson. It's a very hard argument not to make.
I agree.
You know,
I agree.
Things are changing. You know, I think right now we saw Dwayne Dedmon play 2 minutes the other day in Game 5. So I think if the other opposition goes small, I think the Heat can go small. So let's just talk about wings off the bench. First of all, Victor Oladipo is not starting. Now, I know Clay, you can go right to our chat board now. I know that'll be populated with all kinds of suggestions there about that. Look, Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry, if they're healthy, are starting. No one's going to disagree with that, Clay. You need the spacing in the starting lineup. Well, the Heat decided their spacer of the moment is Max Strus. No one is arguing after Game 5 about Max Strus. And, of course, P.J. Tucker and Bam, the power rotation. So you know your first wing off the bench is going to be Tyler Hero. Before I used to say, I was saying on the show every week on our Slomin's Home Shield Inside the Paint show that it was always Dedmon and Hero at 6 and 7. Not so sure about Dedmon anymore, but let's talk about wings. You know Hero is going to be that guy. Well, we also know right now that Caleb Martin looked pretty good in his minutes, and he certainly is an energizer when healthy. He's another guy. Gabe Vincent, remember, he's not going to start once Kyle Lowry comes back. Hopefully, the thought is Lowry's back Monday. I don't think you can summarily remove Gabe Vincent. He has simply earned it. I think you'd agree with that, Clay. So if you have Tyler Hero, Gabe Vincent, and probably Caleb Martin as all your wings, you only have room for one more if you're playing small ball. Victor or Duncan Robinson. And Clay, it's hard for me to justify a guy who went scoreless in 2 games against the Hawks and had 3 points in 1 game. Yes, he had the hot start of saying that he should definitively be ahead of Victor Oladipo. So he's
a defensive liability. If he's not hitting those shots, then
that's the thing. That's what I wrote in my Ask Ira today. I said, usually to play for the Heat, you have to do more than one thing. And certainly if your one special thing is not happening, the 3-point shooting for Duncan. Matter of fact, Clay, I'm going to put you on the spot. And I mean this seriously, not to pick on the guy, okay? But seriously, so I'm going to let you try to formulate this in your head. What is Duncan Robinson's second best NBA level skill? And I'm not trying to demean him. I actually want you to come up with a list right now. So Duncan Robinson's best NBA skill is shooting / 3-point shooting. Number 2 on the Clay Ferraro scouting report of Duncan Robinson, what's the second best thing Duncan Robinson does?
He's gotten a little better at driving to the basket, a little bit. But is it an NBA level skill? No.
Right.
But now in today's NBA, and this is, I think, getting to your point, if he is on with that one skill, then it does enough to help the team in other ways when it comes to the spacing, allowing your slashers to get to the bucket and stuff like that, that you can justify the fact that he's going to be a defensive liability and other teams are going to target him. But if he's not, he can't play. He simply can't. And that's it's not like it's the brutal reality of the situation where you can afford during the regular season to try to allow him to work out of things. But if you have a game and he goes out there and he misses his first 2 shots, it's do or die, man. Like, you can't afford to try to placate his feelings and make sure that he's going to be okay. No, you got to go with the players who give the best chance to win. And what we've seen from Victor Oladipo, and the thing that impressed me the most, Ira, and this kind of answers your question, my whole thing with Vic was always, number one, he needed to be ball dominant in order to be effective. In game 4, he wasn't. He was in the sense that he was getting to the basket and then kicking it out. But even though he couldn't throw the ball in the ocean, he was still finding a way to impact the game. If Duncan Robinson isn't throwing the ball in the basket, he's not impacting the game in a positive way.
So I want to take it here, Clay. I'm going to give you the easier part here because I just put you on the spot, okay? So I'll let you go 1 and I'll go 2. Clay Ferraro, let's go through the Heat's reserves right now, like I mentioned. What is Tyler Hero's best NBA skill? I'll give you an easy one. Here's your softball.
Yeah, shot making, shot creation.
Shot creator, number 1. And then I can say, hey, he's a damn good rebounder also.
Yes,
so you can put that in there also, okay? I'm going to go now. Clay Ferraro, going to make it easy for you. Clay Ferraro, what's Caleb Martin's best NBA skill?
I would say energy, athleticism, especially on the defensive end of the floor, but then also being able to jump. And he's also gotten pretty good at being able to knock down, especially the corner.
Okay, well, I want to take part 2. Don't be hogging this stuff. So you're saying he hit 1.
Fair enough.
So I was going to jump in and say, okay, and number 2, he hits 3-point shots, and maybe not as a spacer, but as an open the court. Clay, I'll give you another softball. Gabe Vincent, what's his best NBA skill?
I'd still give him defense, even though he's been scoring.
And that's fair. And then I'd come back with his career skill of being a really good 3-point shooter, especially as a street 3-point shooter. Clay, another softball to you. Victor Oladipo's best NBA skill.
You know, it's funny because it's not a softball after what I saw him the other night. It's a compliment to him that I think he's starting
Pick
to
one.
do.
Don't be a hog.
I would still say defense. I would still say his ability to
and then
guard the ball.
I would say an attacking offensive player, attack mode player. So we've gone through the 4 other wings, or 4 other wings there ahead of Duncan Robinson. We said with Duncan, finding number 2 is difficult. The one thing I will say about this, because the good thing is we have these juicy bits of 5 straight days of debating the Heat rotation since they don't play till Monday anyway. I do not believe, and not because of Skip Bayless or any nincompoops out there, that Victor Oladipo can play with Jimmy Butler. Not because of animus or anything, because as I wrote at the Sun Sentinel, I think their games are too similar. I think the things that Vic wants to do, Jimmy wants to do. I think the things that Vic wants to do defensively, Jimmy wants to do. So it might be a case, if Jimmy is playing 34 minutes, there might only be 14 minutes for Vic. Now, in a closing lineup, defensive situation, just at closing time, I could see them together. But in rotational minutes, I think that's the problem. So I think what you and I are going to go from here, Clay, is after months of why, or weeks after why isn't Victor playing, I think we're going to go more now to why isn't Victor playing more minutes? Because Heat fans, it's always something with you out there and on the chat board. But I think that's the thing. If Victor Oladipo does not play in game 1, I think metaphorically we could storm the court. Because I think that'll be a high surprise. No, not real, not insurrection at the Heat house here. But I think that would be a surprise. But I do think, Clay, it complicates things for Eric Spoelstra. Some people have come to me and said, oh, this is the last thing Spo wants. Now what does he do? No. As Eric said, would say, these are rich people problems. These are first world problems. He'll deal with it. But it's going to be an issue.
He's a big boy. He knows that this is a good problem. Kane's 1989 asked this in the chat. We're getting a lot of great comments, a lot of great questions. But just to kind of put this thing to bed, the whole Skip Bayless report, if you want to call it that Jimmy Butler doesn't like playing with Victor Oladipo.
Refused to. No, he was stronger. Let's be honest, Clay. He said refused to play with Victor Oladipo and almost treated it as animus and a near hatred when he gave his comment.
It's garbage. What I will say, I think, is more what you just said, which is it doesn't make sense to have the two of them on the floor for long stretches on both sides of the court because they do things so similarly. But you saw when Jimmy Butler is out, Victor Oladipo steps right into that role. And when nobody else could hit a shot in the first quarter, he kept you alive. I mean, that game, they could have been down by 12, 14, 15 points in that first quarter if he hadn't been doing what he was doing because everybody else was tight. Even though they were getting open shots, they couldn't hit him. Then late in the fourth quarter, after he kind of got a second wind, who was the one pressuring the ball, much like Jimmy Butler would be doing? So it's not that Jimmy refuses to play with Victor Oladipo or doesn't like him. It's that it doesn't make sense to put two guys with the exact same skill set out there. And look, nobody's saying that Victor Oladipo is on Butler's level at this point. In extended minutes, when you have other players who are more complementary and can get you to the goal of winning. Now, at closing time, when you need guys to switch defensively, which, by the way, maybe not necessarily in this upcoming series, but if you're going up against a Boston and you're having to deal with Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, oh, by the way, Derek Williams, who all of a sudden looks much, much better, that's when I think you could see that flexibility really help you out.
Yeah, and you know what? Just to talk to people, we were talking big on our crosstalk earlier about how the soup is made sometimes. I spoke to a scout yesterday and had him, and I wrote in the Sun Sentinel, who do you like? Who's better for the Heat, the Sixers, the Raptors? And we went through the matchups. I could easily see an insider or a scout or someone with a team telling Skip Bayless or a media person, yeah, I think if I'm Jimmy Butler, I know it doesn't work alongside Vic. From a strategic standpoint, from a playing style standpoint. In other words, if the Victor Oladipo trade didn't happen organically for Kelly Olynyk and Avery Bradley at that time, I think if you would have gone to Jimmy Butler and said, hey, we might get Victor Oladipo, what do you think? I think Jimmy, who really synthesizes the game, might say, love Vic, but I'm not sure our games mesh. I'm not sure that if there's a price tag attached to that versus another free agent, like instead of Kyle Lowry, who they were talking about acquiring at that 2021 trading deadline also, that's the best fit for me. So I think I got a feeling that's how that happened, is a genuine NBA person said, you know what? I think Jimmy Butler realizes the two of them don't fit stylistically, but nothing more than that. And instead, look, everyone gets their talking points. The aggregators had a field day. We get to fill the first 15 minutes here of Slomin's home security inside the paint with it. So I guess everyone's a winner except for Vic. And Vic played his way through that. I really enjoyed that moment in Atlanta when we were talking to them post-game on Sunday. They had their fun.
Tell them how much I hate you.
Yeah, no, that was the fun part. Spoelstra answering Ira Winderman questions, not as much fun, but hey, that's part of the deal also.
So I do want to talk about, too, like everything that led up to this. And, you grab bits and pieces of reports and it's hard to take everything 100% at face value. But I'm going to give you kind of a scenario of how everything's gone down with Victor Oladipo. And you kind of tell me if this kind of jives with some things that you have heard.
Sure.
Obviously, Victor Oladipo has wanted to be a member of the Heat for a long time. I don't think that is any secret. I think it was one of the worst kept secrets in the NBA. And certainly when he came up to Bam Adebayo after the playoff loss in the bubble, it was on front and center for everybody to see. Now, what I'd heard, I forget who reported this, there was some, I don't know if concern is the right way to put it, but that you've got this organization with the Heat that is uber competitive. And there were some people that weren't 100% sure of having a guy on another team coming over to you and basically saying, I want to play for you after a playoffs. There were some questions, I guess, about whether Victor Oladipo would have that maniacal competitive streak in order to fit in with this team. And so then he comes to the team and they get to know him a little bit. And, you're still kind of in that honeymoon / get to know you phase. And he goes out there and he had been okay. He had some flashes. Then the beginning of that Laker game last year, you started to see the Victor Oladipo of old. I mean, it was like, man, and then he gets hurt
on the dunk.
And I think a lot of people felt like there was a good chance that was the end of Victor Oladipo as a member of the Miami Heat. And then everybody in the organization watched him bust his butt to get back. And I mean, like, the type of intense grinding that it takes, man. And I know we can sit here and say it, but the type of like mental fortitude that it takes to go through the grueling rehab of contorting your knee and your leg in positions for hours just to try to get it strong enough to walk and then to go out there and compete with the best athletes in the game. It almost felt like to me, and this is where I'm going to bring it back to the other night. It almost felt like to me, Victor Oladipo became a member of the Miami Heat, a full-fledged member of the Miami Heat through his work to get back on the floor. And the looks of the faces on Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, as they watched him be able to go out there and play like he did, and then the smile on Bam's face talk, it was like any questions that anybody may have had about him. And that's where, like, I'm not trying to be Disney guy here, but it was like, that's why that was the storybook moment to me, is it was like, not only did he rehabilitate his body to get up to where but his image and his competitive streak and everything that the Heat value. And oh, by the way, he did all of that to get them to the next round of the playoffs. I just thought it was an incredible story.
Yeah, no, as we head out to a break after this segment and go more into Raptors, Sixers, and better matchup for the Heat and really the big game tonight, I just want to say I spoke to someone in the Heat organization during this process when Vic's minutes were uneven. And they told me that they thought Vic would have been well within his rights to say, not this year. I wrote this story about this, called it a gap year, that he could have taken a gap year, that's what Kawhi Leonard did. You know, that's what Ben Simmons is doing. It is not at all unusual when you have a major injury to take a gap year in the NBA. And I know people get up in arms. He's making whatever amount of money. In this case, is the minimum. But that's what players do, because these guys have such great pride, Clay. They don't want to come back as less than themselves. You know, Pat Riley tells the story. He had a guy who wouldn't dress for a playoff game. And he said, if I needed you to get one rebound, to make one defensive stop, could you do it? And the player said, well, yeah. And Pat said, then get your goddamn uniform on and get out there. So for a guy to do that, a bunch of guys wouldn't do that. We've seen that between Kawhi and Ben Simmons and countless others. So I think that deserves praise also. Instead of people saying, what hasn't he done? How many games hasn't he played? That he still can't do X, Y, and Z. He gave it a chance. He had, no matter what happens from now on, he's already had his playoff moment, and that's a good thing. Now we get to see how he fits in against the Raptors or the Sixers.
And we'll talk a lot about that. And I do, it's a harsh reality of this thing, but all of the work that Victor Oladipo put in, we probably wouldn't be shining quite as much of a spotlight on it if he hadn't had that moment. So I almost think it's great that he was able to have it, because it validates nationally and internationally, we know it's a big game, everything that he did to get back on the floor. All right, coming up next, we're going to spin this thing forward, look at the future matchups. But I do want to look back a little bit at what the Heat did to Trae Young. This may be one of the most stifling defensive performances, one of the most rattled I have ever seen an NBA star. It was all because of the Heat defense. We'll talk about that more next, right here on Inside the Paint.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big